So I'm from the National Centre for Universities and Business, and I'm just going to start off quickly by telling you a tiny bit about us. So what we do is we've got a membership base of leaders from universities and businesses, and we also have members that are public bodies, and we bring them together basically in exclusive networks where they can share collaboration and decision-making thoughts, and we do that primarily through exclusive events, and we run about 10 of those per year. And we also do our own research gathering to help inform their decision-making processes. So I work in the area of talent and skills as a research analyst at the National Centre, and we have recently done some work on work experience at the undergraduate stage, and the links between that and social mobility. Just give you a quick outline of the talk. So I'll tell you about what we know already about work experience and why this survey focuses on business members only. Then the aims of the survey and the setup, the sending out and getting responses to the survey. Then the survey results and the next steps. So starting off with the research. There are a lot of reasons why undergraduates don't always participate in work experience, and these are just some of them. The first one is financial pressures, and that might be that they undervalue or they estimate a lower value to work experience than might be the case. So they tend to prefer to finish their studies earlier and then get onto the labour market as soon as possible. Another reason is that they might not be able to afford to take unpaid work experience opportunities, those that are geographically distant from their home, and also those that are lengthy in any particular way, especially if they're already working. They might not be able to switch from a job that they're doing to work experience, even though in the long run it might be better for their work and employability prospects. And then another reason they don't necessarily participate is because they lack the soft skills and the confidence that is required, both to translate what they've learned, what they are learning on their degree into the world of work, but also to go through a lot of the complex application and selection processes that employers tend to put people through. And the third reason is they might not necessarily have access to the networks that a lot of students might have access to, which enable them to know about opportunities, to know how to access opportunities, and aspects like that. Then on the business side, we know that work experience is used as a recruitment tool. So what I mean by that is that work experience tends to act as a feeder mechanism into longer term roles. So an employer might hire a work experience student with the intention of filling the vacancy, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on with our own evidence. And also offers of work experience tend to occur in sectors of employment growth. Those don't tend to be necessarily related to the discipline. So an employer might not necessarily be interested in the discipline that the student is studying as much as they are in trying to, in the long run, fill a vacancy. We also see that work experience recruitment is occurring at earlier study stages. So we've done some work on the computer science field, and that shows that employers are already looking to recruit work experience students in the first year of their undergraduate studies, and it's the same for year-long placement experiences. A lot of that recruitment is starting to happen in the first year of the student's studies, and as well as in the second year, so they're trying to pull in talent as early as possible. And then also relevant work experience is important for employers when it comes to choosing job applicants. So one of the reasons that we look at businesses in particular is because if we went and we tried to collect information from universities, employers tend to approach potentially several universities when they are advertising roles, and in general they can advertise them quite widely. So we start off with a survey of businesses just to get unique observations for each employer. Also the advantage of looking at employer data is that you get information on take-up of work experience, not just offers. So it could be that an employer offers a lot of work experience opportunities, but not all of those are filled. And we were particularly interested in looking at work experience practices and processes that employers are using, and potentially looking at whether they actually consider how those practices and processes might have an impact on access and participation for students. And we also want to overlappingly look at business views on work experience as an enabler of social mobility. So by that I mean that we want to look at whether work experience gives students from disadvantaged backgrounds an opportunity to access roles they might not otherwise have access to. So just a quick overview again. So we want to look at work experience practices and processes and implications of those in terms of fair access for students to that work experience, and also the implications for employers in terms of, are there offers that they are making restricting their talent pipeline or making it particularly non-diverse, and how is that affecting the employer and employee match? And more generally, we want to look at issues of widening participation, because universities are under pressure to double the proportion of students that are entering into higher education from disadvantaged backgrounds in particular. So now I'm just going to quickly outline the steps to the survey. So the first is just defining what we actually wanted to cover in the survey. Initially we wanted to look at the number and the duration of opportunities that were offered, followed by employer perspectives on the reasons and the benefits of offering work experience, the channels and the processes that they use to find undergraduate students, and then any challenges and opportunities they might have. The way that we set up the survey was to obviously look at pre-existing surveys to get some ideas on types of questions and obviously adapt those to fulfil our criteria. So we used, for example, the Federation of Small Businesses surveys, the Confederation of British Industry, some of our own previous research, the quarterly survey of small business in Britain and things like that, just to get an idea of question format and how to change those for our needs. And then the issues that we had to consider were the number of questions, the length of those questions, the response options and the wording of those options, because a lot of the time that can deter or lead to half answering of some of the survey. So the survey was sent out primarily to the business members that we have. It was sent out to 58 businesses between December 2015 and March 2016, and 51 of those were our members and 7 are non-members. And we targeted human resource specialists who are involved in university engagement and recruitment practices and processes. And here I'm just running through how many iterations it took of resending out information about the survey to even our own members just to get them to respond. So, eventually we managed to get 34 out of 58, which is not bad as a response number. 28 of those were our members and 6 were non-members. So just to run through the caveats, obviously, of such a small quantitative study, it's only covering a select number of businesses which are our members, and a lot of those are based in London, so there's a slightly limited geographical coverage. Also, they tend to be in specific sectors, which are mainly the consultancy, financial services and advertising sectors. On the other hand, there are contributions of the evidence, so we're getting unique information on the employer side, and we're also introducing some questions about social mobility, in particular at the work experience stage, rather than just focusing on the graduate employment stage, which tends to be how it often goes, is that there's a lot of consideration for social mobility once you've graduated, but it's also important to understand the impacts of that at the work experience stage, given that a lot of work experience roles end up becoming longer term roles. So I'm just going to run through a series of the results. Starting off with we asked about the number of undergraduates that were taken on for work experience in 2015. And the most common form that was undertaken was paid internships. So 13 businesses were offering between 10 and 100 of those opportunities, and another 9 were offering more than 100. 1-year work placements were also quite important, with another 10 businesses saying that they were offering between 10 and 100 of those. But we also see evidence of different forms of work experience taking place, like insights and work tasters, which tend to be much shorter. And 7 businesses were offering more than 100 of those. And then we look at the duration of the different kinds of work experience, and internships tend to be reasonably short. 13 businesses were offering between 1 and 2 months paid internships, and then 9 businesses between 3 and 6 months, and 7 were lasting either 7 months to a year. And placements, as you would expect, most of those are tending to last 7 months to a year as well, but a lot of the other shorter term work experience forms were lasting less than a month. Next, we want to look at the link between work experience and recruitment. So we asked the businesses about when they had last recruited a university undergraduate into a longer term role, and we broke that down into 3 separate categories. One was if that student had had prior work experience in their business, another was if the student had had work experience from elsewhere, and another was if they didn't have any work experience at all. And we found that actually there's not much difference between whether you've got work experience in that business already or whether you've got work experience somewhere else in terms of the likelihood that the employer will take you on into a long-term role. So 30 businesses in total, just shown here, in both cases were taken on regardless of where they got their work experience from. But there's also evidence that it still is okay students are still successful in getting longer-term roles without prior work experience. And then we also look at when that work experience happened, and most often, as you might expect, it's happening when the student is on the job and they are still a student, so they would go back to university at some point. Then we look at the reasons that employers are offering work experience to students, and one of the key ones is to raise the profile in the graduate recruitment market. So 29 businesses say that they strongly agree that that is the reason that they offer it, and that is in line with the notion that work experience is used as a recruitment tool. Another significant reason is to remain ahead of competitors. So 30 businesses say they do so to beat competitors in the talent race. And then we also look at aspects such as the relevance of the subject of study of the student, and we find that there's quite mixed results on that. So employers are not necessarily hiring a work experience student in order to get some information about what's going on in that discipline at that time. We also then looked at social mobility by asking if the one reason whether they offer it is to spot talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And we do find some evidence there that employers do actually use work experience to try to pull in talented students from those kinds of backgrounds. And then we look at the benefits of work experience, and there's a lot clearer responses here. The first is that better employability for the student is seen as a key reason to offer work experience. And at the same time, one thing that employers see as transferring on is generic skills, which can be passed on to they are useful for the student because they can be transferred between different organisations. Again, we see that work experience is used as a recruitment tool because it's seen as a springboard for a job in that sector. And then we also do again look at social mobility because we ask if one of the benefits is that it gives less advantaged students fair access to higher level jobs. And there are quite mixed results here relative to all of the other categories. So 25 businesses say that they strongly agree that that is a benefit of work experience. Then we look at the channels that employers are using to find undergraduates for work experience, particularly ones that are used in 2015. And here we see a lot of situations that you might expect from larger employers. So one of the areas where they tend to find their students is through exclusive relationships with universities. So 18 businesses say that they always often use that recruitment channel. The same goes for targeted Russell Group recruitment. 15 of the businesses always or often use that channel. But also another important source is local universities, so 16 businesses are always often using that. Then we also look at whether they are going specifically towards universities that have talented disadvantaged students. And we do find evidence that some are targeting, trying to pick up talented students and somehow incorporate social mobility considerations into their work experience recruitment. We also do look at social networks as an aspect of a channel that employers might be using, and that is primarily covered through these last three categories. And we find that family, friends of staff doesn't seem to be a very popular route, or so they say. So we don't seem to find much evidence of nepotism. On the other hand, we don't seem to, but you never know. And then alumni networks instead, they're reasonably important, but perhaps the most important aspect is speculative applications. So 20 businesses say that they always or often use that route. So that all suggests that networks are still quite important for employers, and in reality a lot of these are different forms of networks, because you've got your exclusive relationships with universities are just as much about networks as are family and friends and things like that. Do you have 5 minutes? Okay. So then we just ask about best channel that that employers consider for finding university students for work experience. And the best channel is seen to be university advertising, but there's also, again, there's a significant amount of use of networks, which limits the access that students might have to work experience. And then we ask also about the importance of different factors in recruiting university undergraduates. And again, we see the discipline of the higher education course is not as relevant as other factors which relate to the employer-employee match. So employers care a lot more about the students' attitudes and aptitudes, their motivations, their interests. They care about the employer and employee match, like, as I mentioned, through the fit of the applicant and the organisation. And interestingly, they say that they don't care so much about the reputation of the university attended, but the channels tend to contradict that, because they tend to target Russell Group and they have exclusive relationships with universities. Then we ask quickly about problems that they might have had in recruiting students in 2015 for work experience, and the biggest issue is competition from other businesses. Also, though 13 also say that they have no problems at all, but another 7 also said that they don't have enough access to talent pool students from disadvantaged backgrounds, so that would suggest that social mobility is still an issue. We then also ask about strategies that businesses see the sector could do to improve their access to university undergraduates for work experience. And the most important one, the one that's seen as most effective, is targeted guidance for disadvantaged students in particular, to expand the pool that businesses have access to. 17 businesses rank that as the first most important for their business, and that relates primarily to universities. And what it suggests is that there's still a lack of knowledge about what universities might be offering to help disadvantaged students to gain access to work experience, and to also push them towards gaining opportunities to access those roles. Then we just asked for general comments about what businesses are concerned about when it comes to work experience. And this first quote obviously suggests that there's a strong link between internships and between graduate roles, because they are feeding through from one channel to another. This suggests that corporate social responsibility is another reason that work experience is seen as important to businesses. And then here we have a point which says that we haven't looked in the survey at the university side, which is obviously something that was outside of the remit of that survey, but is something that we would consider in the future. So just to summarise, I think the three important points are that work experience is seen as a recruitment tool. Also, there's not so much relevance of the discipline of study for a student to access work experience, and there's mixed evidence about the use of work experience as an enabler of social mobility. So we've published a report with all of these findings in it, which is available on our website. And the next steps are potentially to look at employer recruitment and selection processes in a bit more detail and try to gauge some kind of measures of how complex those are and how the complexity of the processes might trigger students not necessarily thinking that they are able to go through all of those processes. And then also we want to look at information from universities about exactly the kind of strategies that they're using to try to encourage disadvantaged students to gain access to work experience so that we can fill in the gaps around what the survey tells us.
Thank you so much, Joan.